Hello guys, Crispy here, welcome back to another video. In this one, my friends, I'm going to be testing a GeForce RTX 4060 in the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion Remastered. This one is the MSI Ventus version of the card. I am running it with the latest Nvidia drivers and I'm not manually overclocking it. You can see all of its specs right here in Tech Power-Ups, GPU Z, and over on the left, I am pairing it with the i5-12600K CPU overclocked with 5.1 GHz and 32 GB of DDR5. Let's get into it, shall we? And as usual, let's start by going through the settings. I am starting at 1080p resolution, utilizing no screen space reflections because they look terrible in this game. High settings preset with Lumen hardware ray tracing turned on high as well. Obviously, I will also try this off and with software Lumen instead, which is less intensive. Anti-aliasing is now turned off, as is the upscaling, so no frame generations, no DLSSs, and it's also at 100% resolution scale. Remember this right here because it does not look like native resolution whatsoever. Look at all of that flickering mess. Yep, this is awful. It's because of Lumen and Nanite, of course. UE5, basically, if you don't have any temporal solution as the anti-aliasing, it will look like this. That's why some games force TAA by default, and you can't really disable that. But in this one, it allows us to disable it, but it looks absolutely terrible when anti-aliasing is disabled. So we'll need to enable some anti-aliasing. And by the way, a lot of you have told me, well, not a lot of you, but some people have told me that the reason why the 5090 was performing so poorly was because I was using the DLAA, and DLAA is so much more intensive than native resolution. Well, let's turn it on, add a little bit of sharpness as well, like 20%, and we went from 45 FPS to 43 FPS. Oh, what a huge decrease in performance, right, guys? Oh my. I'm serious here, guys. One person actually told me that running the game with DLAA at 1080p was the same in terms of performance as running the game at 4K native resolution. I'm not even making this up. Anyway, let's keep on going here. All right, let's start counting our FPS as well. DLAA is also the way to go in this game. This way you don't really have much ghosting or motion blur. It's still a little bit motion blurry sometimes. There's a little bit of ghosting around, like the sword, for example, but it's really minor. I don't mind this implementation whatsoever of DLAA here. Even though it's not the latest version, it looks really good. Moving on, the 4060 is actually doing a decent job over here, aside from the stuttering, but that's obviously just because of the engine. UE5 always stutters no matter what. It has insane amounts of traversal stuttering. It smooths out the longer you play, though, because it loads in more shaders and more stuff, you know, into the drivers and so on. So if you've been playing for like 2 hours, for example, you won't see as many stutters as we're seeing right now, but the bigger ones are still going to be there. Now, aside from that and the horrible 1% lows that we're getting here, the fact that a 4060, which isn't really a high-end GPU, right, is doing 46 FPS average with ray tracing on high is actually not half bad. This is okay. If it was a smooth 46 FPS experience all of the time without the stuttering, it would actually be really playable, and the game looks very pretty this way as well. But, well, the stutters just kind of kill the experience for me. I can't really play with stutters, guys. It's not enjoyable to me. I've been trained all of these years to notice stutters and notice the imperfections in frame times and stuff like that in all of these games, that these days I can't. I just cannot unsee the stutters. Anyway, let's stop it right there, guys. And let's try this with some DLSS on quality. I'm gonna use like 35% sharpness. That looks a little bit better when using quality DLSS here. Now I can notice a lot more aliasing, especially around the sword right there. It's like this. You know, but the FPS improved by a heck of a lot. 50-something FPS, 54 compared to 39 FPS when we were utilizing DLAA. And with DLSS, as I told you, things are quite a bit worse, especially here at the 1080p resolution. Not so much at 1440p and above, you know, especially 4K. DLSS quality looks awesome there. Even performance DLSS looks awesome there. It's really really shimmery right now with DLSS. This is probably one of the worst DLSS experiences that I've seen at 1080p resolution. This is actually the first time that I'm trying DLSS quality, I think, at 1080p resolution. So, yeah, quite surprising to me to see some ghosting, first of all. I can definitely notice that. And a lot of pixelation. Like, this looks like FSR in some other titles. If you look at these finer details here, finer leaves, it's all a pixelated mess, basically. And that's how FSR looks in other titles, some other titles, you know, especially like Cyberpunks and stuff like that, where the implementation of FSR is not great. Over here, the implementation of any upscaler is just awful, basically. So, I'm pretty disappointed here with this game's performance. Right now it has smoothed out, by the way, that frame time. We're not seeing as many big stutters as we saw previously, so that's great. And we're getting close to 60 FPS average, so this is actually a really playable experience. I just think it should definitely play better than it does right now, or run better than it does. So now I'm here in the Nvidia app, and I'm gonna override the DLSS version to DLSS 4. You go to graphics, search for the game right here, and under DLSS override model, you want to utilize the latest one. So let's apply that. Also, we can't override the frame generation, apparently, in this game, although this doesn't support 4x MFG, so yeah, let's go back to the game now, and it should be with DLSS 4. Also, by the way, you should probably wait every single time you open this game for the CPU usage to go down. If you don't have an on-screen display, that's going to be hard. Just wait a couple of minutes, okay? Because otherwise you get into the game and it stutters way more than it should. And by the way, I'm waiting every single time for the shaders to compile in the background before jumping into the game. Alright, so we're here with DLSS 4 enabled quality, okay? Let's go over the settings again, I guess. So here we go, 1080p resolution, high settings, high ray tracing, DLSS quality, but now it is DLSS 4 on the Nvidia app. And in terms of graphics, it's not amazing still. I can still notice a ton of pixelation around the weapon there. Yeah, pretty much the same thing actually. Oh damn, no way. In terms of FPS, it's also very similar, guys. These finer details, they're still very pixelated with DLSS quality at 1080p resolution. Not as pixelated as before, I guess, but it's a very minor difference, actually. And I think that's also expected given how this game looks when you disable the anti-aliasing altogether. It's so pixelated. It's the most pixelated thing ever, actually. So yeah, it's... With DLSS, I mean, it's probably working with a little bit of that native resolution stuff. And it's still pixelated, guys. There's no going around this, unfortunately, at 1080p. But if you want closer to 60 frames per second on average, this is the way, in my opinion. It actually works in terms of smoothness and stuff, and on a smaller monitor, this might actually be a very passable experience. Now, we still got that frame generation, of course. Let's enable that. VRAM allocation instantly went up to 8 GB. In terms of input lag, let me bring up the latency monitoring there on the top right corner. 50 to 60 milliseconds. That's not too bad, actually. It's totally acceptable, in my opinion. We can see the 1% lows now on the top right as well, because if I start counting them in MSI Afterburner, they're at 30, and they're not really at 30. That is not indicative of the performance and smoothness right now in terms of the frame time graph and 1% lows. But yeah, it's quite a smooth experience now, especially because we went from 50 to 60 FPS into the 90s. So on a high refresh rate panel, this feels really good. And now that we've been to this area already for a little bit previously, you know, it's not stuttering as much, although those bigger spikes, again, they will happen from time to time. They're not going to be gone because UE5, guys. It's UE5. It always happens, all right? Anyway, let's keep on going here. I hope that they can actually work on optimizing the game, you know. It's Bethesda, so they'll likely leave that to the modders and the community to fix the game for them. But with Starfield, for example, we actually did see quite a big improvement a few months after launch in terms of how the game ran, you know? So Maybe we'll see that happening here, although this is probably the first time that Bethesda used UE5. I'm not really sure about that, but in Starfield it wasn't using UE5. So yeah, 1% lows, by the way, whenever those big stutters happen, and they're actually happening quite a lot more often right now than previously. That's probably because we went in that direction previously, and now we're going into this area for the first time. But yeah, those 1% lows reached like 5 FPS at one point here. That's pretty terrible. It just indicates a lot of stuttering, which this game has, of course. And over here, we're getting down into the 70s and 60s at times, with frame generation enabled, and that latency is going over 60 milliseconds. Now, does that bother me? Not much, honestly, given that this is a single-player title and it doesn't really require super fast reactions and stuff like that. 60, 70 milliseconds is actually perfectly playable, in my opinion, and the FG itself doesn't make the game look worse. Sometimes it does make the game look slightly softer, but over here I'm noticing it's pretty much the same thing as having FG off. In terms of motion blur and ghosting from frame generation, it's not really happening either. It's not more emphasized at all compared to the non-FG stuff. So yeah, if you want a smoother experience, go ahead and play with frame generation. Well, let's try disabling the Lumen hardware ray tracing, which is extremely intensive once again, and just using the software ray tracing on low. This should give us quite a big bump in performance. I'm going to go back to DLAA here, and we'll need to restart the game, so I'm going to do that. So, we're back here, guys, and it seems like this time, with DLAA, we're getting around the same FPS as previously with DLSS, the only difference being, we're still keeping the high settings, of course, the Lumen hardware ray tracing being turned off, and now we're using Lumen software ray tracing on low. So, yeah, this is much closer to 60 FPS, of course. It's 40 still, sometimes. Not too bad, but not too great of an experience either. At least it's now native resolution, and we gained, like, what, 10 FPS? Somewhere around that, maybe a little bit less than that. So, it's unfortunate. Once again, like, you'd think that there would be a huge performance uplift by disabling hardware ray tracing, and that is very intensive, especially on high. But in reality, you disable that, you're still forced to utilize software ray tracing, and the only way to disable that is going into the config files. You could do that. I'm not going to do that with a 4060 because it can still play the game fine with Lumen, and it looks better this way, but still, there are ways, okay? But the developers clearly didn't want people to disable Lumen here, probably because some lighting effects and stuff like that will be broken without the Lumen stuff enabled. I still haven't looked into it, though. I will look into it with a weaker card. It's not too bad. This way we could actually enable the frame generation on top of this and probably get a decent experience out of this still. So let's do that. FG on. Yeah, 80s and 90s right here. Latency is lower, again, because of reflex. Actually, guys, the latency in this game is really good. Sometimes in some other titles, you need a baseline of 60 FPS to enable the frame generation on top of and achieve really low input lags. But here in this title, I think like 40 FPS baseline is enough. Especially given that, again, it is a single-player title and it's not really too fast-paced. I think I would play like this, guys. Software ray tracing is also looking decent on low. Again, there is a difference, of course, between high hardware ray tracing compared to the software ray tracing stuff over here on low, especially doing sunrise and sunset times. The lighting usually looks quite a bit better with the hardware ray tracing stuff, but again, I mean, those are minor things. This is still ray tracing after all. It's just software RT, and it still looks really good. Obviously, once again, it should play better and it should be better optimized and it shouldn't stutter whatsoever for it to be a good experience, in my opinion. It's still not a good experience, but it's playable and you can enjoy the game at least. Most people will be able to enjoy the game, I guess. I couldn't really because of that stuttering, but hey. And if you prefer to utilize quality DLSS instead of frame generation, let's try that out. Here we have it. 70s, definitely a little bit better once again than what we were seeing previously with the... Wait, what is going on? Goodbye, sir. Thank you. It's not a sir, it's just a rat. We still haven't found Bob, by the way. But yeah, previously we would be getting 50-ish FPS with DLSS quality, and over here with DLSS quality and the software ray tracing on low, it gives us 60 FPS, even inside of this castle area right here. Very detailed, actually. I like it. All right. Lots of stuff, lots of water as well. It does drop into the 50s there slightly, but it's not too bad. It's playable, once again. So what else should we try, guys? Let's go back to the main menu. And I guess I'm gonna go with medium settings this time around. Software ray tracing set to low still, and DLAA again. Yep. Seems like a decent combination still for the RTX 4060, and something that I would probably utilize at 1440p. But let's try 1080p first. And well, instead of getting like 54 FPS, I think that's what we were getting around here with high settings, we're now getting 60s, 59, 64 sometimes, so around like a 5 to 10 FPS difference here. The draw distance is definitely a little bit worse at the moment. There's way less detail. Whoa. Okay. Way less detail over on those hills, for example. You can't even see the grass there. And I think what gets hit the most by the drop from high to medium settings is that water, because now there are no reflections on it. Absolutely zero reflections. It looks really bad now, the water. So I think the biggest difference comes from that. Having no reflections, no RT reflections, especially on the water, makes our FPS go up by around 10 frames per second. And that is coupled with a little bit of lower LOD as well, especially on that hill, for example. There are supposedly flowers and leaves over there, but we can't really see them unless we start walking around, and now they showed up. So I don't know, guys. If you want the native 1080p resolution experience at 60 FPS with some drops still into the 50s, of course, as we saw, and low 50s sometimes, this is it. It's a little bit better. It's always just a little bit better. See, we disabled the hardware ray tracing, it got a little bit better. We went from high to medium, it got a little bit better. It's like many of these new titles don't scale that well. We've seen the same thing with Assassin's Creed Shadows. When disabling ray tracing, it improved FPS by like 15%, I believe. Yeah, 15%. And usually when you disable ray tracing altogether, it increases FPS by around 30 to 50%. It's a big difference, you know? 62 FPS average. I think on high it was, what, 58 FPS average. Not that big of a difference, really, in reality. In some areas, the feeling is going to be pretty much the same, especially here, it's dropping into the 40s, you know. I also stopped counting the FPS, so this is not counting for those averages at the moment. So yeah, it's not going to be night and day in terms of the performance here, comparing high to medium settings, unfortunately. And that's a big shame. Once again, it should perform a lot better here on medium, in my opinion. Now, obviously, since it only drops into the 40s and high 40s, enabling DLSS quality on medium settings will make it 60 plus pretty much at all times without the help of frame generation. So if you want to go this route and have a bit of a more pixelated look, but 60 plus FPS all of the time, it's going to be possible on medium settings with the RTX 4060, as you can see. And if you prefer the frame generation instead, well, you can enable it over DLAA as well, because the baseline FPS were above 45 all of the time, only dropping to like 48 or 49. So this is still pretty responsive, 50 to 60 milliseconds in terms of that latency. And yeah, I think if it was up to me, I would just utilize the high settings preset here. And with the frame generation, DLAA, because the experience is basically the same and it will look that little bit better as well. So it doesn't change the experience too much, once again. Also, I actually forgot to utilize DLSS quality plus frame generation previously on high, but I mean, you probably already know it's going to be a pretty good experience. As you can see, it's actually 100 plus on medium settings, and around like 10 FPS on high setting, or 10 FPS less on high settings compared to this. So yeah, works pretty well in terms of average frame rate and in terms of what the number tells us there in the counter, but in terms of the actual experience, it is still a big stuttery mess, so I really don't like it. Now the graphics are just wrecked here. It's way too soft, basically, and you lose a ton of details, so I wouldn't couple DLSS quality with frame gen, I think, especially on medium settings. So let's just turn this off, go back to DLAA, and try it at 1440p. Alright, here we go. We're at 2560 by 1440 resolution using the same medium settings, low software ray tracing, DLAA, frame gen is off. Let's check it out now. And here we have it, 40s, 30s. Yeah, this is a bit too choppy, guys. I mean, the 4060 does pretty well at 1440p in some other titles. Recent ones with UE5, just forget about it. But games like Far Cry 6, for example, GTA 5 Enhanced, these are older titles, I know. Well, GTA 5 Enhanced just came out, but GTA 5 is an older title, right? Yeah, those games will be very playable. There's tons of them which will be very playable at 1440p, even with high or ultra settings on an RTX 4060. But the UE5 games of the world, yeah, they're not going to perform that great, unfortunately. Still, this is above 30 frames per second, so not too terrible. I could play the game at 30 FPS. If I locked the game to 30 FPS, maybe added a little bit of motion blur as well to disguise the fact that it is super choppy of an experience. But I've played my fair share of games at 30 frames per second, even lower than that years and years ago, and I still had a heck of an experience. But years and years ago, games weren't this stuttery, I guess, so yeah. But yeah, this... It's just to say that this is definitely playable, it just depends on who you ask. But this is all with DLAA. And now that we are at 1440p resolution, DLSS quality becomes a much better solution here, because it's not going to be as pixelated as it was at 1080p. Although these leaves, man, like when you're standing still like this, they're good. The wind's still making them a little bit weird and pixelated, but when you start moving like this... it just wrecks it completely. So maybe the problem with this game is having too much detail on the grass and vegetation. Also, I'm noticing another thing about the medium settings. Those shadows are popping in very close to us, as you can see. Not great of a look compared to high settings, but it's still very passable in my opinion. The overall look of the game still looks good, especially if you don't nitpick around finer details and stuff like that, which are all blurry and pixelated. Anyway, guys, since the DLAA stuff didn't get 40 plus FPS all of the time, I'm not gonna attempt frame generation on top of that, but quality DLSS here is a good baseline to enable frame generation on top of. And at 1440p FG DLSS Q, it gets us those 80 frames per second that we've played with tons of times previously in this video. It's still responsive, 50-ish milliseconds of latency, going up to like 60 milliseconds at times. So again, not too bad at all. You can feel it, but it's not bad, alright? If it goes above like 70 milliseconds or 75 milliseconds is where it becomes really concerning. Below that, it's noticeable, especially at 60 milliseconds, but not that big of a deal, once again. And over here, it was a little bit more intensive previously, the first time we came here, so second time, looking pretty flat at the moment, actually. Like the colors aren't popping whatsoever. The water, again, is what gets affected the most by the medium settings. Really bad looking right now. But we're still getting 70s and 80s. Latency is still well under control there, so pretty playable. Hello. I'm gonna put my weapon away. It's a Tertia Viducia. How's it going? Can I cook something here? Can I steal your help? No, I'm not gonna steal anything from this gal. She is a very nice host. Doesn't complain at all that a random guy just came into her house. So, yeah, guys, I think that's about it for this video. should we try 4K resolution real quick? You know what? Since we're here, why not? And here we have it. This is it. I'm just gonna disable the frame gen first, do DLSS performance medium settings. DLSS performance is rendering the game at 1080p resolution and upscaling it to 4K. Again, it does a really good job, much better looking than even quality DLSS at 1440p, better looking than 1440p native resolution, because you can see like those finer little details. Well, you can't really see, but I can see. They're still pixelated, even with performance DLSS at 4K, but nowhere nearly as bad as it was with the other resolutions. And finally, let's just enable that frame generation and see the latency increase. We gotta wait a little bit for it to completely apply and stabilize. Yeah, so it stays in the 70s, 80 milliseconds range. Doesn't even reach 60 frames per second. Surprisingly, though, the latency is not too terrible still, even though it's well above 70 milliseconds at the moment. But I can't recommend this. Like, this is way too bad of an experience. And it already swapped some things that should be on VRAM into the RAM, by the way. RAM usage is a lot higher right now. So that means that we just ran out of VRAM. 8 gigabytes is not enough for these settings. And it's hurting performance as well. Surprisingly, it's not stuttering because of the VRAM, though. Hey, we found one good thing about the optimization in this game. If you run out of VRAM, doesn't seem to be hurting performance by too much or make it stutter a lot more. So yeah, with all of that said now, that's been it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful to you. Let me know if you're buying this game. Let me know if you have been playing it on the RTX 4060 and if you're enjoying it or not. Thanks very much for watching. Love you all. Bye-bye.